This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 278 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. Joining me for this episode is a brewer who I've known and socially and professionally for the last couple years, but we've got a fantastic opportunity and a reason to talk. Ryan Joy is now head brewer for Sweetwater. Do you call it Sweetwater West or Sweetwater, Colorado?
Sweetwater, Fort Collins.
Sweetwater, Fort Collins.
That's what my email signature says. So.
Perfect. So Ryan, like I said, I've known you brewing at other breweries around here in the northern Colorado, and now of course Sweetwater took over the old Red Truck location, which had taken over the old Fort Collins brewery location, and now you are heading up. You are head brewer over there. Tackled some interesting brewing problems because Sweetwater has also acquired the rights to brew the Green Flash and Alpine brands. And so I think what we're going to talk about today on the podcast is taking a hold of these iconic brands, figuring out how to brew them on different brew house with ingredients that have shifted over the years into some other place. Tastes, of course, the expectations for visuals and textures of beer have changed. You're in a whole different water situation out here in Colorado. There's a whole bunch of things you've had to figure out as you tackle these brands. And of course, the expectation out there amongst drinkers who love these things is that you better not screw it up. At least that's my expectation, because these are iconic brands, not just for me, but for a lot of brewers that I talk to, in that particular, it's weird to listen to brewers talk about just how important a beer like Alpine Nelson is in the history of beer.
Yeah, these are beers that I came up on too. So it's
exactly. And so now you've been charged with taking on these kinds of groundbreaking beers and brewing them right here in Colorado. We're going to talk a lot about that, and we're also going to talk a little bit about how Sweetwater brews with terpenes, because especially in the kind of weed inspired beers, or at least the aromatic kind of approach to using terpenes that are common in other recreational herbal things that people consume in states like Colorado where those are legal. Sweetwater makes beers that are meant to evoke some of those kind of weedier, funkier aromas and flavors, and you all do that in without using cannabis, but using it with a terpene process. And I want to talk about how you all do that. What that kind of creative process looks like, what the technical process is around that, how you make those things stay in suspension and make for compelling beers, but even figuring out how to make those flavors.
Yeah.
That's a process of of how do you map out what those things are to help create those flavors. Anyway, we're going to talk about all of that, but first, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, are you ready to brew like a pro? ProBrew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery to the next level. Check out www.probrew.com for info on patented ProCarb inline carbonation technology, ProFill rotary filling and seaming can fillers, the Alchemator inline alcohol separation system, 7 to 50 barrel brew houses, and more. ProBrew, a subsidiary of Technoblend, now a ProMock brand, offers the craft beer industry innovative solutions to help you brew like a pro. Go to www.probrew.com for more info. All right, Ryan, give me the story. What's your story? What was that moment for craft beer, and how did your career arc progress?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast and listen every week. So the information that comes out from all the fantastic brewers that are on here is stuff that's really, really helpful in doing our job. So thanks for putting this together, and thanks for having us.
Hey, we couldn't do it unless you all talked with us about this. And it's just, I appreciate everyone trusting us to be a conduit to share this kind of stuff and put it out there in a respectful and a deep way, talking to good people that are open to putting this out there. Again, we couldn't do it without folks that are willing to talk with us. Yeah. So it's all you guys.
Yeah, so I've been kind of kicking around in the northern Colorado brewing industry for, I think, right at 10 years now. And
Sure.
my story's like most. I started home brewing when I was too young to buy. It was a hobby I got into with my
Sure.
dad. I kind of brought it up, and he was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I think it was about 19 when I first brewed our first batch, and never really knew that you could, first of all, make beer at home, let alone it could be a job. So it's definitely not what I was going to school for. It's
Sure,
not what
sure.
I finished school in. And I was once I finished undergrad, I was working seasonally in the hospitality industry. Had a couple different jobs back and forth seasonally, and finished grad school. That last seasonal season.
What was your grad school degree in?
It's a business degree
Sure.
from here at CSU in Fort Collins. So, finished that. Didn't want to go to school anymore, so I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I was unemployed for a little bit of time and had a little bit of background knowledge in home brewing. I walked into a small brewery that had opened up down in Berthoud called City Star Brewing, and asked for a job about 6 months after they opened, and kind of just started coming in, cleaning kegs for, not a lot of money per hour, bartending for tips.
Sure.
And, that's kind of the evolution of a lot of people back in 2012, 2013, getting into the industry.
It is still remarkably a fantastic way to get in, and I hear, the number of high quality, talented brewers who started by bartending or, again, cleaning kegs or working in the cellar, some of these things are learned, and they can be learned in that time frame that basically through this long-term apprenticeship within craft beer itself.
Yeah, that's, and the great thing about it was, and I advocate for this for new brewers, is make sure you get paid. That was a big time of a lot of volunteering and things like that. So it was really nice. I got paid for the work that I was doing, even though it was 1 day and then 2 days and 3 days a week, and worked up to being full-time there.
Nobody works for free anymore.
No,
can't afford to in this economy.
Yeah, and was there for just under 5 years. We had some really good success in that time. It was a good time to get into the industry. Sure. A lot of great breweries opened up at that time. We had some success. Won 3 GABF medals while we were there.
Yeah.
But after about 5 years, I kind of exceeded the knowledge of the 3-barrel system that we were running on there, and kind of wanted to keep progressing through my career. So I actually took a sales and delivery job with Bootstrap Brewing down in Longmont, right as they were expanding out of their kind of 15-barrel pub system in Niwot. They put in a 30-barrel system. So I did a little bit of sales and delivery down there, and moved into the brew house about 4 months after I started working there. Got a lot of packaging experience, like first canning experience over there, learning to run multiple turns at a time on a big brew house, not on a 3-barrel brew house. And I loved working for Steve down there. They're doing some really nice beers down there. Really cool people to work for. But I got approached to take over a small brewery that'd been open for about a year in Windsor, and kind of had to jump at the opportunity to do my own creative thing. It was
onto a small system again.
right back to a 3-barrel system, basically in a closet, and was really I was really able to be super creative over there with sours and hazy IPAs, and like every brewer love brewing lagers, so had the time, energy, space to do some really nice lagers that I was into at the time. And I ran that.
You had to do a lot of turns on that system even to fill your own fermenters.
Yeah, we were doing double turns. So they're still long 12-hour brew days to fill 7-barrel brew house over there. Right before I left.
Paying your dues over and over again.
Yep. Right before I left, we opened a pub and put in a 10-barrel system. So that was a little bit more. We started canning during the pandemic over there. So another opportunity to do branding and stuff wrapped around some of those beers. So that was really cool. And then as Sweetwater was kind of coming into the picture with taking over Red Truck, I got approached again by some more people in the industry that they needed some help over here. And it was another opportunity to progress and grow into that knowledge base of like massive, what I would consider massive production brewing on our 50-barrel brew house here at Sweetwater, Fort Collins. That's nothing in compared to the 300-barrel brew house down in Atlanta, but doing multiple turns, having that ability to have quality control that you just don't. It's really, really hard to have on a 3 or 10 barrel or even 15 barrel system. So
yeah, and I mean, production now is probably what, in the 30,000-40,000 barrel range, and your goal is to go up to what, 100,000 a year?
Yeah, we have. I think we could probably do 30 to 40 out of what we have right now, and then we have some expansion plans that should. It's going to be tight, but should max us out at maybe 80, as long as the throughput's there. It's going to take a pretty massive expansion to get us there.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a different scale than the 3-barrel brew houses that you've spent some time on. But there you go. You've played on the ups and you played on the downs, and you've done the creative work and enjoyed the opportunity and the flexibility that small systems give you, and now you get to go flex it on the big system. Now, you guys also have a 10-barrel pilot system at the Fort Collins Brewery too.
We do, and they've got a small pilot system down in Atlanta, so. We as the brewers get to play around on that. We still have a tasting room, so if there's something that we're getting asked to, the tasting room people are getting asked that we don't have, we can put that together on a pilot system, and it keeps us interested in innovating too. So.
Well, I've enjoyed the beers you made over the years, and it's I've had beers at every one of those breweries, from City Star to Mash Lab, and of course Bootstrap, even though I didn't realize you were down there at the time, and now I'm drinking some beer. One of the beers that you been brewing out now of this location in Fort Collins, Alpine Nelson, as you all have taken on those brands through that Green Flash bankruptcy and whatnot, and are now brewing Alpine beers and Green Flash beers here in Fort Collins, which is weird and surreal, because these are beers that I grew up on, that are formative for me in craft beer, formative for a lot of people, even for you, as you mentioned earlier. I want to talk about this kind of process, about taking on these kinds of things, and what how you all went about doing that. Before we do that, supply chain challenges are here to stay for a while, so why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard has partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more of concentrate from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes from various carriers and can stay up to date on the status of your shipment. To get started on a freight quote for craft concentrates today, head over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, packaging beer can be a daunting task, but buying cans shouldn't be. American Canning provides packaging supplies at competitive prices in order quantities catered to craft. Think single truckloads and half-height pallets rather than million can minimums. For a smooth packaging experience, also consider their ultra-compact single-operator canning machines. Pricing begins at $25,000 with a quick 6 to 8 week lead time on most equipment. American Canning exists to help share your craft in cans. Learn more about their ecosystem of solutions at americancanning.com. So, I can't imagine how that conversation went. We were like, yeah, we're going to have to take on, Green Flash IPAs and Alpine IPAs and brew some of these iconic beers here, but talk to me, as that process came, as that became a reality and you saw that the opportunity was here to do this, what did the process start to look like? How did you all work from, like, here's a recipe and a broader idea for what this beer is, or what it has been through this kind of production environment here? Imagine, as most corporate things go, even digging back to find previous iterations of recipes may have been kind of a pain in the ass and maybe not have happened. It might, your access past a certain point is kind of limited, certainly through the process, as it went down with that. But what is, give me broad strokes about, how you all undertook this project from the start.
Yeah, so we were pretty fortunate. It was a pretty quick acquisition. Certainly didn't have every brew log for the last 22 years. I hope it's sitting around somewhere. I'd love to look at them at some point. But
sure.
But we had a little bit of visibility and a little bit of time to collaborate with the brewers that were doing this out at the Green Flash facility. We took the brands. We didn't take the brewery or the equipment or anything like that. So we had a little bit of visibility on that. They brew on the same scale out there, so it's that 50-barrel brew house. It's different than ours. Ours is very much a German lager type brew house that we're making a lot of IPA on now. But so there were some structural things with just what we have to do to get stuff to run. That was very interesting. But yeah, fortunate enough to have some visibility with some of the previous brewers to help us through that process as well. Like you said, there's such historical, I don't know, historical is the right word, but
influential, inspiring, groundbreaking.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough that I had the beers in the past too.
Right.
So I kind of knew what they'd been in the past. So it's just been a really, really fun project to work on. You mentioned the water out in San Diego is absolutely terrible for brewing, to be honest with you. It's there's
no offense, entire county of San Diego, but unprocessed, we should say.
Yes,
it is a much more challenging water to brew with than this very clean, surface reservoir water that we have here in Colorado that ends up very neutral and very easy to build up to.
But there's absolutely a reason that IPA and American IPA is just historically comes out of that San Diego County area. It's the water's pretty good for brewing IPA, but it is ridiculously hard. The best part, like you said, is this clean water we have here. We have a really, really good base, so we can pretty much lay down whatever additions we need to do to replicate that process or that water out in San Diego, and that's pretty much what we've done. It's a massive amount of salts that goes into we're used to throwing just a little bit of stuff here and there for like the lagers we used to brew at Red Truck, and it's just an absolute bonkers amount of salts to me that are going into these beers to replicate that San Diego water profile.
So let's look at it in a broad sense. You get a recipe, you've had the beer in the past, you're trying to rebuild this, but you're also doing it on a system that is, completely different, not completely, but mostly different than the system was built on. And the system that it has been most recently brewed on at Green Flash is different than the system that it was designed on initially up in Alpine. And so, the beer's gone through some of these transitions along the way. You also, again, you have these ingredients things. So, what are those pieces that you could identify, whether it's like thinking about it in a creative way, and it's like it really has to achieve this, or even thinking about it from a technical recipe way, like these are the things that just have to be there, and and then there's some of those kind of like key creative and technical points that you guys identified, because there's a lot of moving pieces, but there's some things that you absolutely know you want to achieve as you do it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define what those things were that were kind of the core of these beers?
Sure. So we had to definitely stick with the rye aspect of this beer, which is not
in Nelson.
In Nelson, yeah. Getting in, we can get into some of the other beers here in a minute too, but with Nelson, it's got to be rye. It's got to be Nelson. We're lucky we were able to take over some of the hop contracts too, so we had the correct hops. We weren't having to go out.
Oh, that's good. The same crop.
Yeah. So it'd been selected by people that had been brewing it for a while. And so that was really nice. And I think they'd already selected for the next year too. So we had visibility on all the ingredients, and we're able to source them really, really quickly. But creatively, this beer has morphed a little bit since we've got it. It
morphed when Green Flash started brewing it, and of course it's going to morph some more. But even within breweries bring their own beers, like those morph too.
Yeah,
ingredients change. Like even tasting. When I look at this Nelson now, and I even look at how the McElhaney's brew their own version of it.
Mm-hmm.
Months now, it's much hazier than it ever was back then. These beers were never hazy like this when they were turbid. They were just not hazy. And now they're all hazy beers. It's weird to look at it. Some of these things have definitely shifted over time.
That was an operational, thing that we had to adjust. I've actually talked to Pat about this too. And we weren't getting that stable haze that
Yeah.
people were wanting in the beer. This beer used to be a Chico beer, and we've switched the yeast in it. Because it's got to be shelf stable. Not to say that theirs wasn't, but we weren't getting the quality haze that people were expecting in this beer, and getting it to stay on the shelf as long as it needs to stay on the shelf. Hopefully it's being treated, correctly that entire time, but we can't always guarantee that. So we're doing everything we can to keep that haze in there. And that, this beer classically was Chico beer. It's a West Coast IPA. I still, all the styles have kind of morphed, but I'd still think this is a West Coast IPA to me. It is hazy for sure. It's got that Nelson, punch to it. But that was an operational change that we ended up having to make, because we started it on Chico and we couldn't get it to stay.
Won't stay.
It's just not
Chico.
gonna
yeast doesn't. It's
Yeah.
it's so haze negative. Ugh.
Yeah. So that was a big was a big point coming back from sales, is this isn't staying hazy long enough, and that there were a lot of meetings that went around, about changing the yeast of Nelson, but to get that haze to stay in there, a yeast change was required. I think it did exceptional things for the hops too.
So when it was being brewed by Green Flash, they were brewing it with Chico out there,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hazy, but it just
I don't know.
it's hazy-ish.
I don't know everything they were doing to
fair enough.
to get whatever haze was initially in the beer.
Right.
But it wasn't staying hazy for us. So it was a challenge that we had to take on, and it required.
So you moved yeast.
We did.
Dang. Well,
Yeah.
that's huge.
It is, and there's some other beers out there that classically were Chico that have moved on to some other beers or other yeast too. But
Oh heck yeah.
we're really.
So what did you
happy
move
with-
to that could handle that kind of shelf stable?
We're running a London 3 on it.
A London 3, okay.
So,
Yeah.
And that's a yeast we keep in house, because we other Sweetwater brands use that yeast. We run Chico too, on Duet and some
Right,
other things,
right.
all the West Green Flash brands as well. But that's the biggest operational change that we made in this beer. It still has that kind of like diesel-y Nelson
Sure.
thing that's just awesome about that, but loads of like
And
tropical fruit.
You're right. Like it is what the cellar maker guys would call a West Coast hazy IPA, and that it's not sweet really. Like there's not much sweetness in it, no more than there might be or maybe ever so slightly more than there might be if this was a pure Chico West Coast version, but no more than people are pumping into some of those clear West Coast versions in order to kind of heighten that juicy, fruity character. But it is something about that Nelson that just gives it that kind of like clean, white floral kind of, freshness that, that doesn't feel as kind of fruity. If it's tropical, then it's more of a funky tropical than a like overly sweet tropical.
Yeah.
And
I think the rye might do something there too.
Yeah.
I'm not overly sensitive to like rye flavor. I am in whiskey or rye lagers or something like that. I'm not overly sensitive to it in super hopped beers like this, but I think that rye spiciness kind of plays in with some of those like bigger hop flavors, the diesel hydrocarbon thing, and it like dries the beer out just a little bit. We kept calculated BUs pretty much the same, but it's that presentation of the bitterness in there too that it makes a difference in my opinion. It doesn't have to be all your bittering hops at 60 minutes or something like that.
Sure.
We're getting bitterness out of the whirlpool now.
We
too,
bitter in
so.
different ways these days, right?
Yeah.
How do what is this an all Nelson beer, or are there other hops that are involved
So
in the bittering side?
It's I'd have to look at the actual ratios, but the other hop in this is Southern Cross.
Oh, right.
And as far as I know, that's been in there for a while.
Yeah.
Probably since Southern Cross kind of came about. This obviously was like one of the first beers that was like Nelson. Oh my God, what is this hop coming out of New Zealand down there? So.
The idea of even doing this podcast episode hit me because the other day, actually, I guess it was yesterday morning, I was working on a Pick Six story for our next issue, and had thought about the fact that Mike Sabo and his pick six in our Best in Beer issue that's out now mentioned McIlhenny Munce and Alpine Nelson as being this formative beer for him. And Doug and Jess Reiser of Burial said included the exact same beer in their pick six. And I started really thinking about this, and those Alpine IPAs, they were groundbreaking for me as a beer drinker, and just influential, changing the way that I thought about what was possible in beer, and throwing me down this Nelson rabbit hole, which I am still deep into. And I love Nelson, just in an unnatural way. Like, I just can't get enough of that hop. But so it's interesting to go back and look at it now with this context and where things have gone since then. Were there some other kind of creative points? Obviously, the yeast itself wasn't going to be a deal breaker. You needed to make sure that it met people's expectations for this. The people that want to buy a Southern Hemisphere hopped IPA right now that's semi-dry and has this were there other pieces along the way that you're like, okay, we've got it here to this. You mentioned water.
Yep.
So again, there's a ton of trying to match that kind of water profile, so this comes across the same kind of way. Talk to me about how you've then built that up.
So I think with the water, we've kept the water pretty much the same as it was. And I think that kind of keeps it in the West Coast realm too. There's a lot of things that you can do with those salts to bring up your sulfates, even in a beer that's hazy, to accentuate any dryness that you're going to get out of it, or any bitterness or any hop wonderfulness that you're going to get out of something that's a little bit more sulfate heavy. So kept the water pretty much the same. So it's not water you typically brew with a hazy IPA.
Yeah. So tell me about that. Like, what would your typical hazy water profile look like versus this West Coast hazy water profile?
Yeah. So you're doing 2-to-1 chloride on a hazy. Yeah. There's actually quite a bit of chloride in this. It's just not the right kind of chloride. It's a lot of sodium chloride.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just what the water is out there. So you have that salt, actually, like real
salt,
real salt that is presenting in their water, keeps it kind of salty, kind of drier. So balancing out that chloride, it's not calcium chloride that's going in there. So bringing up magnesium sulfate, and the calcium sulfate in there too, to balance that. It's kind of unintuitive if when you're looking at what the profile is, because it is chloride heavy, but it's not what I would consider the right kind of chloride for a hazy beer. So balancing that water out a little bit is keeping it kind of true to where it's coming from, essentially.
Yeah. What's the kind of load, the parts per million load in this?
Oh man, I'd have to look. I'd have to look it up. It's like the salt, the whole menagerie of brewing salts that we put in here is it's like 8 pounds per 50 barrel batch in the mash and the mash and the boil. So
you're going heavy.
It's more salt than I've ever seen go into a beer. So,
interesting.
It's crazy.
It's kind of fun to think about that in a creative kind of way. Are there other how about color and malt in this? Were there some kind of things that you decided like this is something we've got to? You mentioned rye, of course, being a thing, and you being a German brew house weren't necessarily set up to brew stickier adjunct kind of malts.
We actually didn't touch the malt at all. Yeah. So we've like I said, we brewed this with Chico to start, and made some of those operational changes later. But we didn't touch the malt bill at all. It's exactly what we were presented it with when that came over. So
it's just a basic American 2-row and some rye, or
2-row, a little bit of Maris Otter and rye.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it's a pretty simple rye IPA recipe.
Yeah.
But I think that was one of those things that was critical to keeping it within brand was keeping it a rye IPA, despite the challenges that we have brewing it on our brew house. You definitely don't want to change that. That's I don't think it's on the package, but it might be on the package. Definitely on the website.
It does say it says rye IPA somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah. With that Maris Otter, why tuck some Maris Otter into the middle of this? Otherwise, characterful bill that I mean, I would expect something like Maris Otter to kind of get lost amongst the rye, but
yeah, you would have to ask a previous brewer that.
There you go. Okay.
Probably, but typically when I'm building some sort of pale base, I like to throw something that's a little bit more characterful in there. I don't know that it's presenting ridiculous. We've never done it without it.
Sure.
But when I'm building pale recipes, I like to throw just something that's a little bit, whether it's just 10% or something like that, a little bit more characterful to give any sort of nuance of malt in there without adding a ton of crystal malt. We can talk crystal malt when we talk about West Coast.
Yeah. Let's talk about hops in this then. You have the Nelson and Southern Cross, idea for it.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, over the years, the way and times that people have added these things and the things we realize about what you can get out of these hops has also kind of changed. So what did you stick to? You mentioned you've got the same selections, so you've got some consistency across that.
Yeah.
Volumes are going to probably be similar. Did anything else change in this process?
Volumes are exactly the same. The dry hop is exactly where it was.
Sure.
We've made a little bit of adjustments in that kettle to kind of get maybe pull a little bit more aroma, so moving some of it to the whirlpool to pull more of that hop flavor and aroma out of the whirlpool. We get a decent amount of bitterness out of our whirlpool too, so I have no problem holding some of that aroma in there and still getting the proper bitterness that we're getting. We don't do a full.
That's true. I'm sure your German brew house maintains its whirlpool temperature pretty pretty tightly.
It is one thing, and I think they were doing this actually. We're not doing a full. You like to call it a cool pool.
Sure.
We're not doing.
It's such a good word. It sounds good, right? It's
yeah.
Cool pool.
Yeah. But with our brew house,
Yeah.
we have an external calandria, so we can boil at sea level temperatures or higher if we want to, which is something they could do too. So we boil this thing hard,
really?
and then are able to add a little bit of cold water to knock that temperature down just a little bit.
What's the benefit of boiling it that hard?
I think it's so we have enough room to add enough water to get it to cool enough. So if
you're also up here at a high elevation where things are dry and you can boil off more quickly than some other places. But.
Yeah. So that external calandria is great. If I want to boil at 215 degrees, we can do that. We're not going to get that if we're just going to boil at, here in Fort Collins, we boil about 204. We'd have to boil forever. It'd probably be double that we'd have to boil to get that enough evaporation to have enough room in there to get a little bit of cold water in there to knock that temperature down.
Okay.
We're not trying to knock it down to like 160 or anything like that.
Right.
Maybe like drop it below 190, hopefully.
Okay.
But I think that they might have been doing that, but that's something that we think gives this beer a really, really nice hop aroma, or keeping some of those volatiles in the whirlpool, making it into the fermenter.
In terms of maintaining IBUs and looking at efficiencies between those things, did the efficiencies on the systems match up, or did you find that you are getting maybe a little additional efficiency out of your highly efficient system?
Not familiar with what kind of efficiencies they were getting on that.
Sure.
We might be a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Again, with some of those challenges in the water, essentially, it could be about the same.
Yeah.
But I don't have a ton of visibility.
So funny. I remember when Sean Lawson had spun up their new brew house. He was like, "Yeah, we did our first batch on it." It was like all of a sudden our hop utilization rates were just crazy on this German brew house compared to what we had been brewing on before. And so you brew the 1-to-1 recipe, it's not going to be the same beer, right? If you're getting more greater utilization, then you've got to adjust those things in a different kind of way. And
yeah, I think we've got a decent amount of experience on the brew house, and there's people that have a little bit more experience on this brew house too. Since I've even been here, so we have a pretty good idea what that's going to be. So if we catch a recipe that we need to scale or something like that, we actually scaled down for Sweetwater. So, which is crazy, but we're a little bit more efficient than they are, just because I don't know exactly why, but we are.
It's the miracle of brewhouse systems. Sure. Well, maybe we can switch some gears, talk about another Alpine beer, maybe some Green Flash, and then we can talk about some terpenes after that. Before we do that, ABS Commercial is a full-service brewery outfitter proud to offer brewhouses, tanks, and small parts to brewers across the country. They stock equipment ranging from 3 barrels to 90 barrels and offer custom-designed equipment up to 900 barrels. Contact one of their brewery consultants today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your brewery project. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. Also, ready to get into canning but not sure where to start? Twin Monkeys Beverage Systems has helped hundreds of breweries around the country and around the world tailor packaging solutions that meet the unique needs of each brewery, pioneering many new technologies like integrated liquid nitrogen dosing, expandable canning machines, and automated fill tuning. Twin Monkeys continues to push the boundaries of what is possible and what is necessary. See their lineup at www.twinmonkeys.net. All right, Ryan, let's pivot a little bit, talk about West Coast IPA. Not that we weren't talking about West Coast IPA with Alpine Nelson. Let's go from talking about hazy West Coast IPA to then talking about slightly less hazy, but still not perfectly clear West Coast IPA with Alpine Duet. And then let's also talk about Green Flash West Coast IPA. Again, iconic brands like when I was living on the East Coast in the late 2000s, drinking figuring out what was now happening in IPA, like Green Flash West Coast IPA was just one of those fundamental beers that changed the way that I thought about hoppy beers. So again, from on this Green Flash West Coast and Alpine Duet, talk to me about taking these beers on.
Yeah, so Duet I thought was we thought was less pliable, just my understanding of the brand, and we're doing this almost to the T to what we think they were doing, or at least the previous iteration of Green Flash was doing. It's pretty assertively bitter. It has that same salty San Diego water profile, and then it's just classic the duet of Simcoe and Amarillo. That combo still works today in different styles of beer too. And I love it. It's piney, it's resiny, it's bitter, it's crisp, dry. So we really haven't moved much on Duet. It stayed pretty much the same.
But Amarillo's changed over the years, though. I mean, that's a hop that has not necessarily stayed in the same place over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Simcoe's kind of the same way too. I don't know if
the Simcoe's back these days, right? Like, are we back on Simcoe again?
Yeah, we might be. I think maybe the Citras and Mosaics of the world kind of came in and stole some of the party, right? So maybe they haven't changed that much, and we have.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. I kept thinking about that as I was drinking Nelson yesterday, prepping for this, and I went back and looked. I was like, I hadn't had Nelson or Duet since 2015. Like, that's 7 years now since I last had those beers. And like, as much as I can taste them now and think, well, those don't taste exactly the same, like how much of that I imagine more of that is me than it is anything else, and my context for that has changed.
Yeah, it very much could be. I mean, we were having a discussion the other day on what actually defines West Coast IPA. I think
sure.
I think the style has kind of diverged into classic and modern.
Yeah.
And somebody was telling me that Duet was a modern version of IPA, and I disagreed because it's been around for a long time.
Yeah,
So,
I wouldn't define this. I do think you're right. I think there is a modern iteration of IPA. I've had conversations with brewers like, Zach at Slice, or, Kelsey at North Park, or Evan at Green Cheek, and Highland Park. A lot of these guys are moving that definition of a ghost town, who's been winning, just won a big GABF medal for it. Like they've been changing this definition of what modern West Coast IPA is. It generally involved more Pilsner malt. Oftentimes is now involving 3470 fermentations. And, and so, these are absolutely more modern than West Coast IPA used to be. Definitely more fruit flavors, definitely a slightly lower bitterness, IBU levels, just general perceived bitterness levels. You're right. I wouldn't call this that.
Yeah.
This is definitely, it's funny how this now feels a little bit more classic in that sense.
Yeah. And this was this discussion centered around color and the use of crystal malts and things like that.
Sure.
There's, again, not totally sure how this evolved over time. Doesn't really have a lot of crystal malt, and this beer's been around for a long time. We can get into West Coast IPA, which
Sure, let's talk about that.
which still does have some crystal malts in it, but seeing an evolution on that. This beer, again, like you said, just absolutely classic. That big malty crystal malt backbone on it historically, and then just like assertively and maybe possibly abrasively bitter at one point. And we've evolved this beer just a little bit. I think it's such a classic beer that you can't play with it too much. But evolving some of that crystal malt out of there, I think that helps on shelf stability, and just doesn't present as sweet. Keeping it.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How have you moved to create this color without using, say crystal caramel malts that might be more oxidative, might shorten your shelf life, might produce beer that is a little bit less palatable?
It's really just pulling some of it out. We're not substituting yet. I think there's still room in this beer to...
You're not using Lovibond levels that are out of the typical range where some of the most oxidative material, tends to happen.
They're pretty light crystal malts, but I'm of a newer school in that the less crystal malt, even in a West Coast IPA, is better. This is a classic West Coast IPA to me, and we can evolve it a little bit, but I think it still needs to be true to what people are expecting in there.
Is there anything to the hop choice that either heightens or downplays some of that potential oxidative effect? Or increases shelf stability or decreases shelf stability?
Yeah, I don't know about we're hopping at a similar rate, again using maybe just a little bit different to take away that astringent bitterness that you may have got on this beer.
This definitely tastes a little bit softer than I might have remembered it, but partly, I don't necessarily remember that old 90 IBU, and I remember Green Flash beer 150 IBU pallet wrecker. That was just these are just monsters, but they were just so ragged and just so inelegant in the way that they presented that kind of bitterness. The expectation is for much more elegance and smoothness.
Elegant is a great way to look at that, I think. And it's a classic hop. It's Simcoe, Columbus, and then dry hop is everything you'd expect to be in there. We have added some Citra to this to try to just brighten that hop flavor, bring it up into the modern world, but still have it be an homage to maybe a previous self on this beer. So we're pretty happy with how this beer's coming out.
Yeah. Are there any other key points that have kind of shifted through this process in Green Coast, Green Flash, West Coast IPA? I'm going to figure this out one day or another.
Again, similar water profile. We again, dialing some of those BUs back, but not really. We kept them all pretty much the same, other than dialing some of that crystal malt back. This one had to stand on its own, and maybe with some of these other innovation brands that we've recently came out with, that became kind of our playground as well. So.
What did let's maybe pull out and look at like what did the general process look like? How many did it start on the pilot brew house before it moved to the big brew house? Imagine as you were brewing, you are looking at how things are working, because you're on a 50 barrel system and brewing into 150 barrel tanks, like you're going to do multiple turns. And so you can make some adjustments between brews. What did that kind of iteration process look like as you started dialing these up and were then kind of evaluating on the fly as you went?
Yeah, we got thrown to the wolves basically.
Okay.
We did
it's like, make it right the first time, guys.
I did do the water was the most concerning part. So I basically built like a mashup of Duet and West Coast IPA to test the water profile.
Yeah.
And brewed that on our 10 barrel system to make sure we weren't just like brewing with seawater or something like that.
Right.
And then we kind of just went for it on all those beers after that. Like we're okay at what we do. So and 50 barrels is 50 barrels is a lot, but it's also not that much. And we can brew to blend too. So it's that's not out of the realm of possibility too. So if we're missing a little bit on the hot side, we can adjust on that if we get through fermentation and we want something a little bit more, we can brew another batch and blend some of those things out that we don't like. So that is one thing that I'm not used to on small systems. And back in some of my other places, there's no blending. It's what comes out.
We need a beer on tap, so you're gonna have to crank it out. And, unless you want to spend several more days brewing more of this, and then we can't have all of our tanks taken up by all of this one beer, so that you can be able to blend it all back.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but yeah, with West Coast IPA, it had to be something that was going to be worth going into the can and that people were going to say, yes, this is what.
Have you moved to any, say more like advanced hop products in these in order to either change the kind of, the impact of vegetal matter or soften the appearance of bitterness or, drive some more intensity and flavor?
We, not necessarily in these brands.
Yeah.
They're pretty stable in that. We on Sweetwater brands we definitely use some of those hot products. They help with mainly like things like cryo. We have a pretty much 100% incognito hazy pale ale too. I'm of the school that those concentrated hop products are awesome because they help us with yield, but I don't always love them by themselves. I think that classic T90 hop flavor is so important that they're good to blend. Some of these products are really, really good to blend in to help with yield and maybe concentrate some of those flavors. But I think concentration can lead to kind of one note aspects to some of these hops as well. So if you blend Cryo Cascade with regular Cascade, you maintain some of that classic Cascade hop flavor and still get some of the benefits of a higher yield using something like a cryo or something like that.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, let's talk about terpenes. This is something that when I think about Sweetwater, I think this is probably one of the more kind of pioneering places that Sweetwater has really made a mark in the world of brewing, and that is using terpenes that are naturally derived, to mimic some of the, kind of notes that you might get in that kind of weedier, dankier space, and build beers that taste like things that aren't necessarily, classic beer kind of aromas and flavors. Talk to me about this process. I'm curious, as you all, and that G13 brand is a kind of, premium, like prime place for that. It was something that you all are expanding, and now it's going back, I think, down to more of a kind of focus around a single beer. But figuring out like talk to me about how you go through that kind of, brewery process, both creatively figuring out what terpenes are doing what and how they're producing aromas and flavors,
Yeah.
how they work together, and and how you all could even think about building say a quote unquote terpene recipe for a certain kind of aromatic profile.
Right. So G13 is basically where that whole project landed. They did do a couple different trials on trying to mimic some of those flavors and aromas that are coming out of different strains of cannabis. So we had Mango Kush and G13, obviously, and they tried it in pale ales.
Every fermenter at the brewery, by the way, is named after a different weed strain, a cannabis strain, and so it runs deep there.
Yeah, it's definitely a big a big part of our branding. But that project went into trying to replicate some of those aromas that were coming out of those different strains. I'm not totally up to date on like the producer on the terpene products that we're using, but they are hop derived. And basically what that came down to, and maybe there's other producers out there now that are doing different technologies on them or new processes to get these products out. But the terpenes are Columbus derived in G13, and that was the one that they came across that really was the most cannabis and dank forward. And when you drink that beer, it smells just like cannabis. It's amazing. It's the dank flavor that comes out of that product is really great. As far as like operationally, it's very, very tiny amounts. I mean, you've had other brewers on here talking about what the small amount of oil that a whole box of hops comes down to, and it's less than 100 milliliters of product derived from an entire box of hops. So it's very small, goes in on the cold side, and just creates this amazing aroma that is not cannabis based, but certainly smells like it.
Sure. No, and that ability for through various distilling type processes to distill out those terpenes, whether it's whole spectrum or whether it's individual terpenes that you're then isolating and blending back together into this kind of perfect mix. It's a fascinating idea of process. And figuring out what those terpenes are, that kind of commonality between those weed strains. I mean, I can only dream of being that lab person doing the GC, on these weed strains, trying to figure out what those spikes were of these various terpenes, that are producing some of these aromas. That sounds like some really important science, that they were doing to come up with this, and then going back in and isolating those out and then reblending to hit a similar kind of profile. Within your terpene mix that you can then add back into the beer. It's pretty awesome, kind of cool.
It is, yeah. It's that's science that's way, way above my head. But it is cool what's coming out, and I don't know what our future with terpenes is. Like I said, we've done all that R&D on that with using different hops to see what they're trying to replicate. And I think it kind of comes back to some of those concentrated hop products, is they getting them to be in themselves so different is really, really hard. Finding that such and such hop creates this replication of this aroma of this strain, it becomes kind of one note, if that makes any sense. I think that's kind of what when we were doing this process, they came down to, and it all just came back to G13. This was the most replicative of that strain. Some of the other ones just weren't enough to, or different enough from, say, G13 to put a ton more effort into doing all kinds of different strains. So
And then
of
the
course,
Girl Scouts were like, "No, you can't use our brand for
Yeah.
for your Girl Scout cookies,
Yeah.
strain beer. No, not going to allow that one."
yeah, yeah.
No, it is certainly interesting. Is there any issues with solubility then in that, or is the terpene extractor, then able to then use some products? 'Cause I know that is the new wave. I keep getting pitches about this from various companies that are finding ways to like solubilize otherwise insoluble or non-water soluble things, and terpenes are certainly one of those that are hard to keep in solution like that.
Yeah, I see a little bit of difference over the lifespan of the beer, say in the keg or in the can.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it falls out. I think it just kind of evolves into something else.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even speculate as to what that is. It becomes more when it's super fresh. It's really, really dank, and as that beer ages, it doesn't. I'm super sensitive to oxidation. It's not an oxidative quality.
Yeah.
It's like it becomes more fruity rather than that, like plant matter dankness. That's what I anecdotally see in drinking G13. It's a
You
beer.
see a diesel drop off.
A diesel drop off. Yeah.
Yeah, trademark that right now. Yeah.
That'd be a good beer name. So.
Ooh, okay. That's interesting. Playing with any other things in that kind of terpene space, or
as far as I know, there's not any plans on a large scale, but it would be interesting to try and learn about more if that extraction process has changed from the supplier that we're using.
Sure.
And looking at other suppliers and seeing what kind of technology they're using to extract those terpenes, or if there's other product-based terpenes that still aren't cannabis that can become TTB approved, and that may be throwing those better than hops are. Maybe we're not. Maybe there's other products that might throw those volatile terpenes better than hops are.
Sure. Well, it's going to be interesting to see where you go. Of course, your parent company is Tilray. They're a large, cannabis focused company, and it's interesting to watch that entire business develop, through North America as legalization tends to take hold, and amongst various states. And it'll be interesting to see where that beverage space goes as more cannabis-based beverages or ultimately become more and more legal, and there become avenues to get those out. Obviously, these are still very early days for that kind of thing. And, I imagine there's a whole bunch of legal hurdles for everyone to jump through. But I will make my own personal statement on that I think that, human adults can make their own decisions about their own morality and their own, needs and ways they want to consume these things. And certainly, I'm not a big weed consumer, but I don't have philosophical problems with the way people use it, and I think that it's hard to make an argument that it's any more damaging than alcohol is socially and medically and everything else. And so, from that perspective, I think it's going to be interesting to see where those things go. And I think you all are uniquely positioned as somewhere in the nexus of that to help drive some of that innovation. And so I imagine we'll hopefully have some conversations as some of these things develop as well.
Yeah, they're great at supporting the beverage space that we're working in now. It's great to have them as backers to do the innovation within the things that are legal for us at this point. So that's
absolutely. And of course, just acquired Montauk Brewing now also, and so Montauk joins your family of breweries, and I think you guys are going to be brewing some of those beers soon here too, huh?
Yeah, that's going to be another kind of replication project that should be fun. We just brewed a pilot batch down in Atlanta while I was out there this week. So
cool.
But super new. Excited to have another kind of growing brand. I'm not super familiar with it yet. We haven't got any out here. We don't get it out here. It doesn't distribute.
I've had plenty of Montauk beer because they send it to me.
Okay.
And so, and you can read our opinions of those beers on beerandbrewing.com. We've got reviews of those beers because, they've kept us in the loop on that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, it'll be another exciting project to take on.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, it's been wonderful talking to you about brewing. It's interesting to think about you shepherding, taking on some of these iconic brands. I mean, normally we'd ask some sort of big picture question, but on this one, I want to make it personal. How's it feel like for you as somebody who consumed and drank and had these beers and was influenced by these beers in your own brewing and your own brewing process, your own creative process? How's it feel to be taking on the mantle of this and and the responsibility that brings along with it to all those beer drinkers that have expectations around these things?
Yeah, it's super cool to have the opportunity. It's wonderful to be on the team that is entrusted with that. I think it just makes us better brewers across the board. So yeah, personally, it's you could call it a little surreal when you think about beers that may have, Green Flash was definitely one of those. Oh man, that's an IPA. I know what that is now. When I was getting into craft beer, so it's we don't take it lightly either.
Sure.
It's we very much respect the history of it, and the base that it laid for a lot of the cool and interesting things that we get to do in craft beer now. And it'll be a cool opportunity to keep these brands successful and to innovate within those brands too, and use that as a vehicle to drive innovation across the board within those brands.
Well, it'll be interesting to see, how this thing, how this dialogue and interplay between these brands ultimately impacts each other, where you all go with it, and what this wild possibility in the future has in store for all of us. For nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. ProBrew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery to the next level. Trust the experts at Old Orchard to handle freight for your ingredients. American Canning provides packaging supplies at competitive prices in order quantities catered to craft. ABS Commercial is a full-service brewery outfitter for breweries across the country, and Twin Monkeys continues to push the boundaries of what is possible with their packaging solutions. Of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, any episodes or all episodes, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, let us know this content matters to you, help support what we do, and help us bring you these episodes every week. Brian, if people want to learn more about Sweetwater, where do they find you? Not that it's that hard to find Sweetwater in the broader world of beer, because there's a certain ubiquity to a brewery that's making as much beer as Sweetwater is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can check out the usual social media stuff there, the Sweetwater website. There's websites for the Fort Collins and Atlanta tap rooms. Keep up to date on what's on tap in those tap rooms. And you can come to our tap rooms, and you can also find Green Flash Alpine beers in both tap rooms right now too. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for talking to me for the podcast. Cheers.
Thanks, Jamie. Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.